Good morning, and as everyone listening to this podcast will already know, Donald Trump is now firmly on course to be the 47th president of the United States. After a night that kept everyone holding their breath until gone 2 a.m, Kamala started losing the key battleground, is behind in the other swing states, and some of the US networks have started calling it a sensational return for Donald Trump.
You're listening to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily. We'll try and give you everything we can in 20 minutes, as always, as the sun is just coming up in the UK here. Donald Trump is headed to a party at Trump HQ in Florida. Kamala Harris has gone quiet. We're not expecting to hear from her at all tonight. We're not expecting a concession speech right now, but everyone can see that her path to victory looks almost impossible now, and some people, as Sam says, are already calling it for Donald Trump. We are going to have to talk today, Sam, about what this means for Britain and what this means for the world.
The forecasts were wrong. The betting markets turned out to be right. But what matters now is how prepared is Britain really for what is about to hit us, the world and America? How can Labour, whose biggest figures have picked a fight with Donald Trump in the past, really expected to be treated by the man returning to the White House? And can we cope with the turbulence of global affairs that everyone is predicting flows from him becoming president once more?
It hardly needs saying, Sam, that this story is going to dominate the day. It is going to dominate the week. It is going to dominate the next 4 years, and goodness knows how much longer. There is actually quite a lot of stuff happening in Westminster today that we probably ought to talk about as well. It's Kemi Badenoch's first PMQs as leader of the opposition. It's Rachel Reeves' first appearance at the Treasury Committee as chancellor after the budget. Those are big political moments, but of course it is all going to get eclipsed by Donald Trump. But we will try and give you a little bit on those as well, because they are important.
Do you want to just start, Jack, by telling us what you think we need to know from overnight voting and what looks like the cusp of Donald Trump in a sensational return to the White House?
Yeah, just very briefly, because there's so much analysis of this everywhere, and the votes are still being counted, and this is a moving target that we are talking about. But it's pretty clear that the polls almost universally were wrong. They undercounted the support for Donald Trump. What we've seen is a reversion to politics in 2024, which is that the incumbents get thrashed, that voters care about the cost of living and immigration more than anything else, and that all of the other noise around Donald Trump was nowhere near enough to stop those huge political trends from sweeping him to what looks like a certain victory. We know that there were 7 swing states in play. It looks like he's on course to win all of them. 2 were called reasonably early in the night for him, and more are on the way. It seems that black voters and Latino voters came out for Donald Trump in bigger numbers than the pollsters had predicted, although exactly as Donald Trump, we should say, had predicted. It appears that white working class voters came out bigger for him than the polls were predicting, but exactly as he was saying was going to happen, and that the surge of female support for Kamala Harris because of the threats over women's abortion rights did not materialize in anywhere near the same numbers. And so Donald Trump is winning in a much bigger way than any of the predictions had said. It's in a way, it's almost 2016 all over again, Sam, but even bigger. It looks like he might win the popular vote, which, like I say, almost nobody saw that coming. So all those people who were saying he's going to win comfortably in his camp, they were so confident all the way going in. You heard Nigel Farage yesterday saying he thinks Trump will win comfortably. Those guys were absolutely on the money.
So there's a whole set of stuff that I think there's a read across to British politics on. Of course, US politics is not possible to cut and paste everything across to UK politics, but it strikes me there are some big and obvious lessons for all politicians who are watching what's going on stateside. This turned out to be an immigration election. Kamala Harris didn't look like she had a clean, easy answer to why the numbers of people entering the US were continuing to spike. They claim to understand this dynamic in Downing Street. They have done for weeks and months. But the question is Keir Starmer's answer to this question, for instance, of boats and all the rest of it, clean enough as well? I think they'll be looking at what was happening on that subject in this election quite closely. It's a realignment election. The Tories had hoped at the last UK general election we might see something of this with ethnic minority voters breaking much more for centre-right parties. That didn't happen here, but it has just done in the US. Donald Trump is on course to win 1 in 3 ethnic minority votes. That kind of realignment suggests it's possible. Could it be possible in the UK? This is a vote, as you were just saying, that the Democrats hope will be driven by abortion, but actually it's driven by, in part, this extraordinary radicalisation of sort of young men who have had their worldviews reinforced by what they see online, on podcasts, on YouTube. That kind of dynamic is going to come to this country too. A sense of Donald Trump and his team tapping into grievance, and young men in particular sucking it up and acting on it. That is fascinating, all of which is bound up in the fact that one of the biggest players is a big player in the UK, whether we like it or not, and that is Elon Musk. He runs Twitter, now X. He is by Donald Trump's side, has been for most of the campaign. He has very strong views on Keir Starmer's government and isn't afraid to express them. How is that dynamic going to play out? Because that feels like it's coming here. And the final lesson for UK politics, from what we've seen, is you can make a comeback. Donald Trump, if he'd lost this election, could have ended up in jail. Instead, he's ended up in the White House. Comebacks are possible in politics, even if you stand behind things like the January 6th insurrection. It matters not the scale of what you did. Voters appear to be able to forgive anything. And in the context of badly behaved former leaders of political parties, I think that might count for quite a lot. Who on earth could you possibly be thinking about? You think you can see Boris Johnson leaping around with glee at this result, can you, Sam? We need to think about the UK. The reassuring thing for Britain here is that the Labour Party, who are obviously in power here, have been thinking about this for months. They've been preparing for this for months. They will not be surprised in Downing Street by this result, despite what all the polls were saying about it being neck and neck. There had been an assumption amongst very key people close to Keir Starmer that they would be dealing with Donald Trump in the White House. They've been preparing for that possibility. Keir Starmer, of course, was one of the first world leaders to phone Donald Trump after the attempt on his life earlier in the summer. That was an important moment, or Downing Street see it as an important moment. Keir Starmer got that 2-hour dinner at Trump Tower in September inside number 10. They believe that went well. They believe they have a good relationship with this camp, despite the obvious huge problems there that are standing in the way, as in Keir Starmer is obviously a liberal. Donald Trump is very obviously not. Many of Keir Starmer's top team have said very, very forceful things about Donald Trump in the past. And that in particular feels like a very interesting dynamic now, Sam. I mean, it's hardly the most important question to pose on a morning like this, but what does it all mean for the Foreign Secretary? I mean, David Lamy looked to me to be in a lot of trouble in that position if Donald Trump won the election, given the sort of the nature of the comments he's made about Donald Trump in the past. His team are very keen to brief that he has, built bridges there, that he got on with Trump's team very well when they've been working at this over the last few months. And yet, why would you have a foreign secretary in place who has that on his track record when you're trying to deal with this, what is going to be an incredibly difficult relationship for Keir Starmer to maintain? Conversely, the other person who's going to become hugely important in British politics or even more important than they normally are, is the British ambassador in Washington, who is your sort of point person dealing with Donald Trump, trying to manage Donald Trump's team on a day-to-day basis. Karen Pierce has done great work building up those relationships. Everybody says so. She's expected to be leaving that job. Do you really want to replace the one person who actually has an in with the Trump team at the moment and replace them with a different political figure? I'm not sure. So those sorts of questions are now going to be swirling around in Downing Street as they contemplate the new reality of another Trump presidency. I mean, there's no doubt that this government has done a very good job briefing us about just how prepared they are. But my goodness, is that briefing and the relationships that they've tried to forge at haste going to be tested. In the last half an hour, a figure from the influential Heritage Foundation, right-wing Heritage Foundation, Niall Gardner, he's actually a Brit, undoubtedly conservative-lined, has just tweeted, "I imagine Trump-hating UK Foreign Secretary David Lamy is a nervous man today. It is impossible to see how he can work in any way with a Trump presidency after his vicious attacks on Donald Trump. Words have consequences." It was in 2017 that David Lamy said that Trump was promoting promoting fascist, racist, extremist hate groups and addressing the president directly, he intoned, "You are not welcome in my country and my city." It was in 2019 when he just started to think about maybe he could going for the leadership if Labour lost the next election, that Keir Starmer was tweeting that an endorsement from Donald Trump, which Boris Johnson just had, tells you everything to need to know about what is wrong with Boris Johnson's politics and why he isn't fit to be Prime Minister. Humanity and dignity, 2 words not understand by President Trump. Those comments are the backdrop. And yes, there has been a huge effort, particularly by David Lamy, ever since he was appointed to the job of Shadow Foreign Secretary in November 2021. And he can boast some successes, and he does boast some successes. He has forged a relationship with the Vice President, J.D. Vance. They are said to have bonded over difficult upbringings, the fact that they were lawyers before they were politicians, and he is hoping to be able to use that number in his Rolodex to his advantage when things get tricky. He's also got another figure in his direct sites. He's called Elbridge Colby, who could be the next defence secretary or maybe even the national security advisor. And Colby gave an interview a few weeks ago heaping praise on Lamy and John Healey at the expense of the Conservatives. So this guy could be at Donald Trump's side, very influential in foreign affairs. And he said as recently as last month, right now, you've probably not seen Conservatives in America and Conservatives in England so far from each other. I've been struck that Lamy has made a real effort to reach out to Conservatives and new right people in the United States. I like what I'm hearing from Lamy and Healey. Their defence approach is more realistic in ways and means, and that's a very positive development from the Cameron approach, which was widely incoherent and ended up putting burdens on the American people, the Libya bombing being the ultimate example. So we have people by Donald Trump's side willing at the moment to go out defending them. But you've just got to wonder how much weight that'll have, because he's up to the most capricious and in some senses narcissistic leader on the global stage, who can change his view at a whim, and it's unclear, constrained by anybody around him. So the question is, does Donald Trump remember the Trump Tower dinner first and foremost, and the attempts by Keir Starmer to reach out recently? Or do people throw back historic quotes, and in the end he sees a centre-left party in Britain that he doesn't mind giving a kicking to?
And I do think the random factor that Labour had not taken into account when they were doing all that work through 2024, preparing for this moment, is the Elon Musk factor, someone they have, fallen out with extremely badly. We saw the war of words with Musk through the summer when the riots were happening here in the UK, and Labour seemed fairly happy to have that fight, perhaps not appreciating, why would they have appreciated that at this point Elon Musk looks like he may end up being potentially even a powerful figure in this administration or working with this administration, clearly a voice in Donald Trump's ear, and he is someone who is definitely not reconciled to the centre-left government in the UK, and you do wonder how that dynamic is going to play out with Trump in the White House from January. We should talk about the bigger picture, Sam, because it's not just about personality clashes, this, although obviously that is a big part of any Donald Trump regime. It's about policy as well. The implications for American domestic policy are enormous, of a Trump presidency with the promise of mass deportations and so on. That's not really for us to get into in this podcast, but as we were saying yesterday, there are 2 enormous policy consequences coming of another Trump presidency. One on global security, and particularly with Ukraine. It looks like Trump is going to go and try and broker some sort of deal there very quickly. That's what he's saying. That changes everything about European security. We don't know where Trump's going to go on NATO. That was this question that was floating around for the whole of his first presidency. He just about hung on in there, but if this really is an unfettered Trump, then NATO, American membership or commitment to NATO is back on the table. That is how Britain protects itself, and all of those questions start to come back into play in a way that it's really quite hard to get your head around when you've been so used to the sort of post-war settlement of America will be there, and stasis in Western Europe basically stays as it is. The other one, of course, is trade. We are looking at a new era of global protectionism if Donald Trump follows through on the sorts of pledges that he has made. The most beautiful word in the English language is tariffs. He says he has talked about a flat rate tariff of up to 20% on all US imports. That means retaliatory measures will be coming from the EU and probably from the UK as well. And all of that will have an enormous impact on the global economy and on the UK economy. And, for a Labour Party that's put a huge amount of all of its political capital really on getting the UK economy growing again, and all of its future budgets are predicated on that. This is a massive curveball coming down the track that could change all of that and cause enormous problems for their political agenda.
We export £70 billion worth of cars and pharmaceuticals and Scotch whisky and the like to the US. So 10% plus tariffs on that will be really painful for those industries. But you've given us a little segue into something else important today, because if Donald Trump's return to the White House increases global instability, if Donald Trump's return to the White House means that, for instance, there is greater conflict in the Middle East, maybe even an oil price shock, one of the consequences of Rachel Reeves' budget last week was she left herself very little wiggle room if things got worse in terms of the UK economy. She spent almost all the money that she allowed herself to borrow. There isn't a great deal left in the kitty. The markets were nervous about how far she pushed things. The question being asked by economists and people in the market is, can the UK economy survive an additional unforeseen shock? Well, in the early hours of this morning, there was what looked like the kind of conditions that might mean that there is a shock coming to the global economy now heading to the White House. And instability and unpredictability there was not a lot of wiggle room left for that in Rachel Reeves' budget. And I suspect when she goes up before the Treasury Select Committee later today for her first appearance, Meg Hillier being the new chair, the question of whether her budget was just a bit much and a bit too big is going to come to sharper relief because of exactly what we've just been talking about with the Trump re-election.
UK ministers have completely rightly been able to hide behind questions about what would happen if Trump wins by saying, well, look, the election hasn't happened yet. We don't want to be seen to be interfering or calling an election before it happens in a foreign country. If Trump is confirmed as the winner in the next few hours, as would appear to be likely, then by the time we get to Kemi Badenoch's first Prime Minister's questions at noon today, by the time we get to Rachel Reeves' first appearance to the Treasury Committee at 2:30, it may be that shield is no longer there, and we start to see our leaders having to answer these questions and engage with these questions more clearly. Rachel Reeves hasn't really got into what happens to her budget plans if these American tariffs come in. She may have to discuss that in a bit more detail this afternoon. Keir Starmer is going to have to engage with this at PMQs, and you would think, although Kemi Badenoch no doubt wants to make a splash at her first PMQs, and by the way, I'm expecting her to make a splash at pretty much every PMQs, because she is not someone who shirks the limelight, shall we say. She knows how to grab attention. She's an impressive public speaker when she wants to be. Nevertheless, you feel like the American story is so big that it is probably going to be the main takeaway from her first PMQ session, and she may want to get in front of that and maybe ask questions along these lines. I don't know, but it's clear now that with the result that's coming out of America, Starmer, Reeves and all the rest are going to have to engage with this properly, and we're going to have a proper debate in this country about what these sorts of tariffs and indeed these sorts of potential threats to the global security settlement are going to mean for Britain.
It slightly feels like everything is changing this morning, but some things are a constant, like there's quite a lot of breakfast being made in the background of the kitchen, which so some things are continuing as normal. Look, I think that Kemi Badenoch's first appearance will be conditioned by the likely return of Donald Trump. So what is her view on Donald Trump? She actually was asked about it quite extensively in the last few days by The Independent, and there are sort of three big takeaways. First of all, she is going to bash Keir Starmer for all of the tweeting that he was doing before he became leader. She's going to use that to reinforce the impression that she wants to create, that he is a student politician. She said that undermining the UK. That all of that was done by Starmer when he had his eye on the prize of the Labour leadership. He probably thought he was tweeting hostile stuff about Donald Trump, and there would be little consequence to it. It's one of the few things he could say that would attract Labour members to his side. Now it doesn't look so great in this light, and she will make much of that. She will also say UK politicians shouldn't endorse or not endorse kind of world leaders. That's for their electorates. But she has found a sort of a level on which she can praise Donald Trump. Interestingly enough, she used the fact that he was working in a McDonald's, comparing that to her time working in McDonald's, as a little dotted thread that she could thread, and she was basically saying, I think that if a potential leader of a country or former leader is going to places like McDonald's, it's a good thing. It shows you understand that not everybody works in high-flying corporate careers or in a white-collar job. So that kind of empathy that she wants to show with Donald Trump is the first signal of kind of how she's going to treat the relationship. So I think that is her approach at the moment. We'll see whether she picks it up in Prime Minister's questions. But I think that idea that has been quite consistent, that she wants to present Keir Starmer as a student politician, is something I wouldn't be surprised if she wants to build on today.
The other British politician and leader, of course, who will be emboldened by this result is one Nigel Farage, who was over in America at the moment. He's been at Mar-a-Lago last night at the watch party, at Trump's private watch party. He is going to come back absolutely full of the joys of spring, is he not? And he will feel that the sort of, grassroots revolution, essentially, that Donald Trump is leading over there is something that Reform UK can replicate over here. If the economy doesn't pick up, if you get the same sense of grievance over here that people have felt in America, if you can play hard on people's fears about immigration in the way that Donald Trump has done, he will believe that the Reform UK movement is only going to grow over the next few years and that he can be a serious political player at the next election in 2029. And who am I to say that he's wrong? Nigel Farage frequently calls things right in global politics. He can see the trends coming and he will definitely be spouting that one.
The world has tilted on its axis in the last few hours. Everybody's going to take a deep breath. We'll give it 24 hours before we come back with a bit more. We'll see you all tomorrow morning for, no doubt, 24 hours of incredible reaction to the sensational news that Donald Trump is returning to the White House.
Have a lovely day. See you later.